What's up, clean freaks? We are back in studio for another episode with our water quality expert, Jeffrey Paquet, talking about corrective actions in your water quality management program. Jeff, welcome back to the studio with us today.
Thanks. Excited to be here.
So, sometimes water just, it breaks bad. Kind of the Breaking Bad show. It just wakes up one morning and says, you know what? Nah, I'm not going to follow whatever guidelines you have for me. I'm going to come in, I'm going to cause some trouble. And when that happens, obviously, we cannot allow that. There's a Wyatt Earp that's, standing there with the badge and saying, not going to happen on my watch. So the question is, what does this Wyatt Earp of water do? How do we get our water back in line? And I guess maybe first we should say, who determines what kind of corrective action that we can take? Like, we can't nuke the water. So there's a spectrum here. So, where's that guidance or that, they were called guardrails. Where do those come from for how we can address corrective action?
Right. So if we go all the way back to the beginning where we started talking about our multidisciplinary team and our water quality management plan and how that flows into our policies around water, when we get an alert on something, when something has gone sideways, the whole reason we've done all that is so that, once we get on the battlefield at sterile processing, we've already talked through these scenarios and determined what type of corrective actions we're going to have. So in general, we should be prepared for when something goes wrong. We should be able to go to our water quality policy or water quality management plan and say, okay, yep, this is bad. We have to do this. This is what we have to do, and we have to do it in responding in this amount of time, that type of thing. So it should be prescriptive.
So for folks who are maybe new to this conversation on the sterile processing side, what are some kind of typical corrective actions that you'd see out there in this space, based on maybe what you're seeing in these alarms and alerts?
So a typical thing to happen, and we talked about it last episode, is to have high bacteria in your critical water. Critical water, very susceptible to bacteria, has no disinfectant in it, so anything can cause bacteria to start growing. So it is not uncommon to get a high bacteria reading if you're testing your water regularly. So a typical thing might be in some of your processes, or maybe all of your processes, you will decide you can't use critical water to do any type of final rinsing. So there are ways, you can reprogram your washers to not use to critical water for final rinse. You can do manual final rinse with sterile water, bagged water. There are various ways in which you can do that. It's not pretty. It's not a fast, but you can keep going until you've implemented corrective action. And corrective action would be generally to disinfect your lines, your critical water line, and potentially replace some of your filters if that's where the root problem is. So those would be the type of scenarios you would see with trying to respond to alert like that.
As one of the maybe more common corrective action steps that you mentioned, I'm just kind of curious, when you say disinfect your critical water line, how do you do that?
Well, there's a couple different ways you can do it. A couple of common ways are to introduce ozone. That's a common way into the critical water line. That is a relatively quicker process. There's pros and cons to it because ozone levels aren't particularly good for sterile processing people. If they're too high, it has an odor. And depending on other policies you have around workplace safety, that might not be an option for you, but generally it's safe. Another very common way is to use a disinfectant that has hydrogen peroxide and peracetic acid mixed together. And what you're trying to do when you disinfect, number one is you're trying to kill bacteria. But as important, particularly when you're maintaining, doing this as part of your maintenance schedule, on a routine basis is over time, when you have bacteria in plumbing, it'll begin to form biofilms, just like you might get on instruments. And as you know, biofilms can be very tough to get loose and eliminate, and they hide bacteria that can go through processes to get rid of bacteria and survive and go on to harm your patients. So same thing in pipes, and the paracetic acid helps strip that out. Now, disinfecting a loop in a department can be several hours. It causes shutdown time on critical water, can be a nuisance, but that it is what it is.
Now, if it's disinfecting lines because we're seeing a high bacterial rate, or if it's another kind of alarm or alert that happens when we take these kinds of corrective actions, who needs to be aware of it? And I'm assuming that we need to document these things. It's one of those things like, we don't just want to document when the process is correct. We also want to document when the process breaks down and then it's corrected, through this action. Is there some kind of documentation requirement out there for that?
Well, in general, I don't think AMI-ST 108 specifically speaks to that. But as part of your quality process, generally, when you have a problem indicated in SPS, your infection control people are generally going to be notified that you've got an issue and are going to want to be tracking that issue, right? And so same goes here. Though that should be defined as part of your water quality management plan, how you document it, who gets informed. It's probably important to let the surgical suite know that you've got a problem down here and you've gone to diversion methods on doing this. And probably importantly, by documenting it, you can get an understanding if you've got a problem that's sort of causing this consistent problem, maybe.
Cool. That's great. Well, Jeff, we're going to wrap up this episode on corrective actions and get in gear and get ready again and talk about what the current state looks like. If you're taking all of this series so far and you're coming back to your current system and you're looking around and saying, hey, where are we not meeting what Jeff has been describing over the last number of episodes, and how do we evaluate, who do we get engaged? What's that process look like? So we'll kind of lay out that argument here on the next episode and then jump right back in after that, talking about performing that gap analysis in this water quality conversation. So hang with us, guys. We appreciate you being with the series here all the way through episode 7. And we'll come back here next time with episode 8 with Jeffrey Paquet, our water quality expert here at Beyond Clean. And until we meet again, like we tell you each and every week, keep fighting dirty.